Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Looks like we still have some people kind of coming in here, so I'll go through the first few slides a little bit slowly while people start joining. And my name is Pasquale Napolitano. I'm the Stormwater Maintenance Specialist over at Hydro International, and I'm going to give a webinar here on the state of stormwater maintenance. So, who is this webinar for? You. If you've registered for this, this is for you. This is really a webinar intended for everyone, but more specifically, I think the people who will find the most value from this are specifying engineers, municipal public works folks, city, state, county watershed approval agencies, or local engineers, but also business and property owners or managers could find some value out of this. And what I'm going to do here throughout the slides is just show some photos throughout of failed BMPs here. So you can see here some ponds, bioretention, stormwater separator. Not all systems are failed, but the hope here is that since we see these things every day, I just want to share with you what we see out in the field, so you can kind of get an idea of how these systems can end up looking if neglected. So those will be sort of scattered throughout. As I mentioned, my name is Pasquale Napolitano. I've done a variation of a maintenance webinar probably for the last 5 years now. I've done some papers that also sort of deviate off some of those main points in terms of where stormwater's headed or how things are looking within the compliance or inspection maintenance side of the stormwater industry. So if you've attended one of those sessions before, I'm going to try to change things up a little bit more this time. I want to keep things even more visual than usual. I feel we've all been cooped up for quite a while now, so I did want to keep things a little bit more visual in that sense. So you should see some new things, but also I'll be touching on some other key points from before. As far as where we are, again, Hydro International, we're, as the name suggests, an international company. I'm in the Portland, Maine office in our stormwater. That's our stormwater headquarters for North America. We have folks all over the country, the continent, of course. I just happen to be located out of the main office. What do we do? Real quick, if it's related to water, we do it. Wastewater, stormwater, CSO, pretty much everything industrial water, either on the process water side or surface water side, flood management. Specific to the Portland office or the American or America's stormwater. It's been around for about 30 years, 30 plus years. Manufacture BMPs. We have an in-house lab where we do testing of that. We have thousands of separators and filters installed across the world. And again, a maintenance and service provider. So we not only develop and engineer manufacture treatment and proprietary products in-house, we test them in-house. We also obviously have them installed all over, and we also service these afterwards. So kind of uniquely positioned in the sense that we're working with regulators, specifying engineers, contractors, business owners, sort of all the players involved in a stormwater BMP's life. So why are we talking about maintenance? Well, the truth is, and I don't think this is a surprise to really anyone, but the majority of stormwater BMPs don't receive routine inspection or maintenance. Now, again, leaning on that we're a manufacturer, we can look at our own records, specifically for filters, because you can look at filters need to be replaced every so often, and we can see how often is that happening based on the installation base. It's about less than 20% are probably doing this regularly. I will say that again, over a 5-year period, that 20%, it wasn't always 20%, it was lower than that before. As much as I'd like to pat myself on the back for that, it's not necessarily the case. I think the industry as a whole has been moving towards this. And some of the later slides, I sort of intend to show you what I see as some of the driving factors amongst awareness and gaining more compliance for stormwater inspections and maintenance. But again, 20% doesn't really cut it. We need more than that. What's the result of having little to no compliance? Well, if stormwater BMPs are not inspected and maintained, the structures fail. It's really that simple. And again, some photos here included, a bioinfiltration system. You have some catch basins that are completely covered. You can't tell that they're there, or what's in there. And one of them that's 7 feet of debris. This is not great. Not inspecting means that things get unnoticed. So if you imagine all the work that goes into, if you are a municipal engineer, into approving projects, if you're a specifying engineer, into putting in, the soil and erosion control measures, into specifying the product for the treatment that's needed for the site, all that work, 12, 24 months later, if no one's doing anything, it's like there was nothing there, or worse, things can kind of get out of control. So it's really important that best management practices are seen as an ongoing thing. These are not something that just gets installed and then it's done its job and you move on. Really, stormwater BMPs need to be something that's constantly being checked on and worked on. Why does this happen? I've done a whole paper on this, so I won't touch on it a bunch here, but the gist of it is that there's a lot of players involved. Again, there's specifying engineers, there's approval agencies, and there are contractors, subcontractors, manufacturers involved. And in the end, maybe a developer sells the property, leases the property, properties change hands. It very quickly turns into a bad game of telephone. And so things, basically the lack of awareness and I guess lack of regulatory enforcement is unfair, but just the sense that a lot of emphasis gets put on permitting for new construction. And the same emphasis or resources aren't given often for the back end of that, which is sort of the regulatory enforcement to ensure that these systems are being maintained afterwards. But again, that big factor is communication. And I put the little old lady here with the plans because it's funny, but it's true. I mean, I spent almost my entire morning this morning talking to homeowners and people who represented large box stores who didn't know they had something, trying to get it fixed. So it's very common for people not to know what's going on or to know how it happened or that they had anything. To make matters worse, again, maybe a little bit harsh, but the EPA obviously has its regulations and they're vague, but not vague in a bad way. It's there to be interpreted so that local communities can then interpret how they need to. Rainfall in Nevada is not the same as rainfall in Florida. So, it is intentional to an extent that there's room for interpretation how these should be implemented in various areas. So that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but sort of as this gets passed along, this all gets interpreted differently and people are taking different ways on how to do this. These different, phase 2 municipalities are handling things differently. And so it can get really confusing and some things work and some things don't. And that sort of confusion just sort of kind of perpetuates this issue of people not knowing what's going on or the end user or property owner knowing what to do. Now, the rest of the presentation, again, as I mentioned, I wanted to be pretty visual about a lot of this. So I wanted to kind of show you case studies of BMP maintenance in practice. And before I get into that, though, we do have a webinar, a poll for the webinar that I wanted to run. And it was just curious to see, out of the attendees, have you witnessed stormwater servicing or maintenance in person? It can be, paving stones or catch basins or underground filter vaults or something as simple as, bioretention or swales being, mowed or trimmed. But we want to know, is this something that you've seen before or is it something that, you don't get that hands-on with? So I'm going to attempt to run a poll here. Bear with me while I get it to start. All right, let me see here. So I'll see if I can share the results with all of you. So it looks like pretty evenly split. We had about 3/4 of everyone voted. More than less folks said that they have witnessed stormwater maintenance, which is good to hear because, again, stormwater BMPs can be a whole array of things. So it is good to hear that, something as simple can be seen. Maybe not everyone's seen, full-on confined space entry, underground filtration services, but if you've seen something, it's certainly better than nothing. So I'll close the poll now, and I'll kind of jump through some of these case studies and really just sort of walk through what happens. All right. So here we're going to get into maintenance case studies. Some photos here, just sort of your standard catch basin cleanings. Some with more material than others. Typically, you're going to find a sediment, dirt, sand, grit. You will find maybe dissolved organics, leaves, grass clippings, things like that. Trash. Those are the normal things you can expect to find, depending on the site use. If there's fueling, you may find some gasoline sheen, diesel, things like that. Or you may find worse things. What I want to do, though, is take the more common stormwater BMPs, take a little bit of gray, a little bit of green, some proprietary systems, and taking examples from across the country, from Hawaii to New York, and just sort of give a range of what we typically see when we're doing something, and just walk you through it. So if you haven't seen it, or maybe you have seen this, maybe you have seen corrugated metal pipe detention cleanings. You've been on site for a CMP cleaning, but maybe you haven't actually been inside the chambers or in the rows and seen what happens. So that's what I want to sort of show you. Again, you get your dirt, your silt, your trash, and leaves or mulch can get in there. And again, construction debris is a huge one. Sites that have not the best erosion control measures, a lot of the stuff can get into the chambers and stay there, unknown. And in the top photo there, you can see about 7 inches of silt in there, in the CMP detention. So, how do we clean this? Well, you install maintenance manholes. Maybe sometimes they're at a manifold at the end. Sometimes they're in the center to get down in there and clean them. But what's important to note about actually maintaining underground detention, and it's not unique to CMP detention, but in general, underground detention, is that it takes a lot of work. So there's a good amount of manual labor in terms of pushing and shoveling material to the ends where there's or to where there's a maintenance access, then flushing and pumping, and sort of doing a combination of that, power washing, pumping, to get the material out. So it can be labor intensive. It can be time intensive as well. But as you can see from the photos, these systems obviously can be cleaned. They work very well for what they get installed for. So they're great devices, but you just need to be cognizant of the fact that when these need to be cleaned, it costs money. And that's probably the biggest thing that I encounter when speaking with property owners is, it's not even on their radar. It's not on their budget that this, something they have to do. And to sort of explain that this needs to happen and will need to happen in routine intervals is something that if as a stormwater sort of community we can get in front of that, I think it sort of helps compliance along. Here's another example of underground detention. This example, I'm using some HDPE or plastic arch chambers. There's a few on the market. Some tend to be more popular than others, but you get the sort of the idea here where you have these arch chambers. You have rows where you can use to then flush out the material. What you can see here are examples of ones that have gone, have quite a bit of material in there, a lot of silt, some aggregate, maybe construction debris, a little bit of organics in there too, but definitely past the point where they should be cleaned. Now, to do this, these systems typically don't require that same sort of manned entry that you would see with, like an 8-foot diameter, 6-foot diameter CMP structure. So what you would do is put a nozzle on the end of a jetter and let it run down the rows, flush it out to an access manifold, and then pump that out from the vacuum truck from there. But as you can see here, if things get blocked up, this will stop working, and sites can flood or things can break. So it's really important to make sure that you're inspecting to know when the structures need service. And some of these types of devices, as you can see maybe in the first photo, will have inspection ports where you can sort of stick down and see how many inches of material is in there, and is this ready for servicing. So they tend to be optional. So these inspection ports are not always installed. I would recommend to please always put those in. It makes the world of difference. But sometimes you do just need to get into the access manhole and look down the manifold, such as these photos show, to really get an idea. But inspection ports really are your friend. Just a couple more examples of the same device that I just showed, those same rows. These are the access manholes, or some of them, that we had to get down into to see down the rows. And you can see they're just completely filled with material. So obviously the system's at this point failing or near failing. But once you've jetted it and once you flush and you pump everything out, they're clean and they're operating again, and things are fine. So again, this is a common form of underground detention. It can certainly be cleaned, but you don't ever want to let it get as bad as the photos I just showed you. Another variation, concrete underground detention. This is a proprietary version, but there's obviously some non-proprietary versions out there that you can also have installed on a property. Same idea though, of course, underground detention. What you see here, you have your silt, you have trash accumulating. This is one where obviously you can go down and enter, and you have easier access than the previous example. That's the way this type of structure is designed. How do you clean it? It's pretty similar. You power wash, you vacuum out. If you do need to get down, you have the access to do so. If you don't need to, you don't have to. This particular unit we serviced was a rather small-sized detention structure, but we do have properties that we work with, and the owners have it almost across the entirety of their pavement, their impervious area, and so that's a different animal, and that takes a lot of time. But this is just to show you, your vacuum truck, power wash. If you need it, you can enter. If you don't need to, you can get it cleaned and have the system operating as it should. I think in terms of proprietary devices, stormwater separators, hydrodynamic separators are probably some of the more popular ones. Certainly within the last 20 years, probably the most popular. You see some other devices now and approaches coming on the market, but these are the ones you see quite a bit by sheer volume of what's out there for stormwater BMPs. I would say stormwater separators, hydrodynamic separators are it. These are some examples of some proprietary screen separators. See, they're doing the job, capturing leaves, trash. One example, there is obviously been contaminated with cooking grease, not what it's intended for. But the key to point out is for any type of screened proprietary device, not necessarily particularly this one, but all of them, if you're not cleaning them or inspecting them often, those screens will blind. So though the screens are great, they're helping, if you're not looking at these, they will blind, and then the whole thing won't work. Again, your vacuum truck, either a flexible hose or the standard size aluminum boom that comes down, you can clean these devices out and have them operating back to the way they should be. And I would, again, just based on how many of these are installed, these are one of the more common things. So if you've seen a vacuum truck pumping, it's probably pumping a catch basin or a stormwater separator. Here's another model. This is a model that Hydro International manufactures. This is Downstream Defender. We've been making this for some 30 years. And again, it's doing its job. Looks filthy. It's good because it's there and it's not downstream. Oils, trash, organic debris. They get into the system, and you need to get it out. Ideally, you never see it get this bad, though, right? So yes, it's doing its job, but you want to avoid things getting to this point. How do you clean it? It's really simple. Again, the vacuum truck, you drop down the standard size aluminum booms that go down, clean out the sump, clean out the floatable area. The structure is good to go. A lot of stormwater separators kind of come in those standard precast manhole sizes, your 4, 6, 8, 10-foot diameters, even 12. More common in the last 5 or so years. You're starting to see 3, 5-foot variations of this. But round structures, separator inside it. These trucks can go and clean these out. It's anyone who's used to doing this, it can be like clockwork. And here's another model. This is a different model. Again, this is a Hydro International model. This is the first defense, but the same idea. Here you have oil coming in, being trapped, not hitting the outfall, the outlet of the structure. Another example with trash inside there. Same thing. Bring the truck, drop the boom, clean it out. What I will mention as well for universal to all stormwater separators is just because you don't have a lot of, say, material on the sump floor doesn't mean you shouldn't clean it every so often, because by not cleaning it, a lot of that silt and dirt can get stuck there. You can almost create a false sump where you're starting to lose your storage volume because it's really hard to get out. So that's where the PSI power washer is really helpful in breaking that material out. If you have a structure that's 18 feet down, that changes things. You can get a wand extension to help get down there, but in some cases, for some types of separators, you may have to enter it. And ideally, you never have to enter a separator. So preventative maintenance is way better than waiting until something gets completely full or 75% full, and then you're finding that it's very tricky to get the material out. Now I kind of want to just shift over to the other popular stormwater water quality out there, which is filter systems. The first examples I'll give are cartridge systems. Again, on several variations of cartridge filters out in the market, doing different things depending on how they're designed. You can see the examples here. Obviously, they're ready for service. How do you service? Same way, you're going to power wash to get the material off. You're going to de-water, pump that out, dispose of it. What's not shown in here, though, is the confined space entry that's involved to then undo the carts, have them hoisted out mechanically out of the manhole, put new carts in. That's another side to filters that sometimes can get lost on the owners when it's being communicated, which is, confined space entry. You need to purchase new replacements periodically, and it takes more people. Obviously, confined space entry, you need an attendant, need extra folks there. You need to enter in, takes more time. So there are more costs associated with the filter just by nature of what it is. But filters, by nature of what they are, can do sometimes a little bit more than what a separator can. So again, depending on what you need to use, filters are great. It's just setting the expectation with owners as to what this is after. Here's a different model of cartridge filter. Similar idea, cleaning out the vaulted structure, the precast structure, getting the carts removed, vacuuming out the material right from the carts, power washing the carts off, exchanging the carts to be refurbished, and getting new carts on site. Same thing though, needing the assistance mechanically to help lower and raise the carts in and out of the chamber. That's part of what's involved in this. Needing to coordinate, when our new carts arriving. Are we going to have the carts out on, above grade, ready to take off and to put in? If it's a large mall, you have the space to do this. That's great. If it's not a large property, do we have space to have, a bunch of carts out in the parking lot while we're doing this? So these are sorts of things you may want to consider. But again, here's the process to clean them. You power wash, vacuum, get inside, hoist things out, get things back in. More recently, there's been a lot of membrane filters on the market. I'll just touch on one model here. There are several. Similarly, again, you're going to start to see the theme here. The vacuum truck will suck out the water and sediment. You'll need to power wash the inside. There's some different variations depending on the manufacturer as to how to best service a membrane filter. Some will suggest maybe power washing off, removing them from their housings and power washing them off, putting them back in. But ask questions, how feasible is that, or how long can you expect that to maintain? The power washer can be pretty powerful. You damage the filter from that, or what's the lifespan after you've done that a few times? Those are the sorts of questions you may want to ask. If you're doing it within the chamber, that means you're sending someone down into the structure. That's confined space entry. If you're bringing them above grade to do that, you still need to get someone down there to pull them above grade. And then if you're power washing it up on the surface, where's that water going? That's another thing you need to be concerned with. And then of course, when the time is ready, changing the filters themselves out. So membrane filters, a variation on stormwater filtration, some different things that are involved with them. They can be cleaned by anyone who knows sort of what they're doing in that regard. But just be aware that there's a little bit more to it, or it's a little bit different than a cartridge filter or some other types of filters. And the last example for a filter I'll give is sort of media-based filters that are, sort of, these are upflow filters, Hydro International. And so these are ones that a single person can hold these bags and take out the spent media, bring them above grade, and put new bags down to the structure. This is an example that's pretty versatile because it can fit into a 4-foot round manhole, but there's also variations of large vaulted structures similar to the other types I just showed you. So same thing, you need someone down in there, you need to pump out, you need to power wash. The nice thing about this, similar to some of those carts, is that you can just vacuum up the material after. It's not hazardous, of course, provided there hasn't been a spill or something on site, and so easy cleanup and being able to get in there. It's just a different animal from a cart filter. Again, you don't need that mechanical assistance. You do still need the vacuum truck. You do still need with the power washer on it. That hasn't changed. Provided the system isn't incredibly shallow, you are still going to need to have some confined space entry to some extent. So that's filters in general. Confined space entry, vacuum truck, replacement filters. And so those are things to just sort of keep in mind when you're looking at these. If you own them yourself, if you're a municipality, if you're a specifying engineer, and you're looking to install these for an owner, asking the questions, when does this need to be changed? How much does it cost? And how frequently should we be inspecting these? Now, one that I get a lot of requests for more information on are stormwater ponds. So I will give a few examples of these. It's a little trickier to do ponds, of course, because there's different types of variations of green infrastructure or low impact developments for stormwater. There are ponds and swales, detention basins, etc. So I'm going to do some really broad brush strokes here, just give you a few examples of some sites we've done, in the last year or so. So here is a sort of standard, detention grass basin that needed work. You can sort of just see by the photos, this isn't, new construction equipment, but it's certainly not just a vacuum truck and some, folks walking around with weed whackers. This does involve equipment, and it does involve moving material around, disposing of material. It can be very intrusive, or it can interrupt business on a property when this needs to be done, depending on where ponds are placed. So keeping that in mind is really key. There is a lot of thought over, if you can go green or you can do low impact, just by the name low impact, you're hoping you're not making a big impact. But keeping in mind that without preventative maintenance or operational maintenance, the impact is actually much higher than it would be with a manufactured treatment device, wherein you have sort of a confined space around a precast structure to hold pollutants or things that get out of control. With green, Mother Earth will do what she wants to do in some cases. So, you need to be on top of that and have a routine schedule to inspect, do routine maintenance to avoid the sort of corrective maintenance that can lead to things like this. I'll give another example of actually very routinely inspected site that's actually mowed very often, but what sort of happened over time is a natural erosion over the riprap buffer. And the landscaping crew, maybe to no fault of their own, they're not stormwater professionals, they're landscapers, and so they thought they were mowing, and they didn't really interrupt the growth that started to get into the riprap buffer. As a result, you can see here in the second photo, the whole area ponds up because of this control structure, sort of bottlenecks the water out. But as that water drains down, erosion was coming in. The grass was actually growing into the concrete channel. Not ideal. That's not what you want to see in there. So how do you fix that? And again, the concrete channel does help in that same sense as a manufactured treatment device. The grade does help confine things to an extent, but you do also have to imagine if you have 300 square yards or more of earth, you have to remove, then adding new riprap buffer and stones. It may take time. It may take more money. And it can certainly be done. It's just these are the sorts of things to keep in mind that can happen or will need to happen. Even on sites that are routinely inspected and relatively well maintained, You know, if it can go wrong, it may go wrong. So being aware of that. And the last example, I believe the last example on ponds I'll give here, here's some stormwater ponds. It's sort of a mix of sort of a wet drainage channel and a dry basin on the right, where you can see, you can't really tell it's a basin, right? It's completely overgrown. Saplings turned into trees and the pond sort of disappeared. The fence is falling down because they dumped snow there in the winter, which can be fine. But if you don't know that there was ever a pond there, that's a problem, right? And so this is both those structures, you know, on the bottom row showing you the structures being maintained and serviced. And you know, one of the things I'll mention from this one is once you've done this, what you can find is you may not be able to identify the inlets or the outlet control structure or the trash racks because overgrowth is so bad. So what can happen is you go through, you come up with the scope, you try to help the customer get things cleaned. Once you've cleaned things, you find, well, look, your inlet's damaged and you know, your trash racks needs to be, you know, the rack needs to be replaced. So there's things like that that can happen over periods of neglect. There are ways to try to help business owners or property owners as well, though. You know, if there are saplings that have grown into, you know, decent sized caliper trees, they're not interrupting the actual embankments or anything, well then, you know, maybe you can keep those if they're not hurting anything. So, you know, there are ways around that. There's ways around trying to reuse the spoils and to chip spoils of wood, you know, onto parts of the property that don't, you know, turn into dissolved organic issues in wet ponds. But if you can kind of have that part in the areas that get reseeded with grass, you can try to lower costs that way for owners. But it's all case by case basis. Again, low impact development, it's way more variable than you would see with the manufactured treatment device. And that's just the nature of them. You know, they all have their place, but just being aware of you know, what the other side of that equation is really helps. And this is the last example I'll give. And again, it's you know, needing to flail the vegetation across around the structure, reestablishing embankments, reseeding. Again, it takes time. This particular example is behind a supermarket, so I know a lot of times there's talk about, well, you know, low impact development. You can see it. It's above grade. It's not underground where it gets forgotten. Well, this was forgotten because it was, you know, behind the building and no one was going back there. So it's that theory doesn't always hold, and you know, so it's just having a routine plan in place really helps mitigate having to do this. You may have to do this at some point just by nature of every 10 years, maybe it gets to this point, you know, the embankments are sort of formed in a way where you need to just reset it, and that happens, but you don't want to be doing it every 2 years, right? So, okay. So those are some examples and some case studies. Again, I just wanted to walk through some of that. If you know how that works, and I apologize for having to listen to me drone on about it. If you haven't seen any of that in action, I hope that helps. Again, I think we've all been kind of cooped up, so being able to see photos of what's happening in the field, I hope that helps. Previous presentations I've done a little bit more showing site plans and showing how it works specifically. I imagine a lot of you have been staring at site plans for 12 months and not photos like this. So I wanted to give you something new, so I hope I did. Now, what's working? You know, what's the current state of stormwater maintenance and compliance? There's some things that are really working. There's things in the state, county, city, municipal levels. And, you know, I want to dive into a few of those. It's probably a little misleading, though, showing you some failed BMPs here. You know, you have erosion into a bioinfiltration basin, a manhole cover for a separator that was paved over, no one could find, you know, tires in a pond, and an overgrown pond at that. But good things are happening, and let's kind of look at those a little bit. One of the things that's great and a lot of places are doing are getting in front of it. You see this a lot on the county level. I think, again, these sort of phase 2 areas are really coming to terms with this and trying to get in front of it. This is a state example, a dated one, but it still holds. And you know, this is from the state of Maine. They do a 5-year contract, but you know, most counties, municipalities across the country will see an annual version of this. But at the time of permitting, either for construction or certainly for occupancy, having something in place, something that binds the property owner, the county or the local authority, and even if you can, a maintenance provider or inspector, to work together to say, okay, for this period, we're responsible. We acknowledge responsibility for these structures. This is just one example. There's lots out there, but I think this is the bare minimum you can do if you are a municipal or local government and you're trying to kind of come to grips with how to get in front of this and start managing your stormwater BMPs that you don't own, but sort of your taxpayer base owns. This is sort of the bare minimum you can do. A great example, I have shared this example before, but I love it, so I think it's perfect. Promulgate it, show it, state it. These are examples actually from New York. And you're seeing here, there's a sign saying there's a stormwater separator here, and it's protecting this lake. And it's not an obnoxious sign. I don't think it's ruining the local environment, but if you jog by this area, you're going to see, oh, there's something here. This is doing something. This sort of thing is great. I wish we would see more of this. Again, I'm not a huge fan of just throwing signs everywhere, but doing it where it needs to be, I think, is a great idea. And to that point, here's some examples from engineering drawings showing exactly that. On the left, you have from a stormwater hydrodynamic separator, proprietary device. On the right, you'll have a detention basin. But it's the same idea, putting a sign up saying, look, this is what's here. This is being called out on the civil drawings. If you're a local municipality, approving construction projects, this is a great thing to implement. If you're a specifying engineer, there's no one stopping you from doing this too. You may be doing your clients some favors in some cases because they may not know about it otherwise, unfortunately, after 2 years goes by from the project being started to completion. But really, awareness and outreach are the big thing. This is another example I've given before. There are some really great examples of areas in Pacific Northwest, parts of California, that have done a great job. Parts around Maryland, some counties around there as well, really doing a great job of showing what is stormwater. What's your responsibility? What do you have to do? The example I like giving, though, because I end up finding myself on here from time to time quite a bit, is the St. Louis Municipal Sewer District, and it's their BMP toolbox. And this toolbox is great because if you're a homeowner who has a rain garden or something, and you've heard of stormwater, you pay a tax for it, but you don't know what it is, you can go here and you can learn more. If you're a specifying engineer and you need to know, if I put in this filter, is this going to cover the requirements that it's needed? You can find that here. If you are, a service provider for post-construction maintenance, and you need to know, is this proprietary device, does it require confined space entry? Well, this website's going to tell you. It has everything for all audiences. They've done a really great job of kind of including everyone who would ever need to know about this in one place. And as you go through the links and things, I recommend, if you haven't been there, to check it out. But if you have your civil plans and you have a project number, you can go on the website, punch in the project number, pull up your civil drawings if you don't have them, or have all of them, and say, okay, well, this is actually what they have registered here as BMPs that I have. So it's awareness, it's access, it's outreach. It's really just, it's done in a great way. It's certainly not the only one. There's some great ones out there, but it's just one example I'm showing. Something that I would say has been clearly coming up more and more within the last 5 years is digitized municipal virtual documents. These are huge. These are so great because previously what you were finding were sort of photocopies of PDFs. They kind of looked like something that had been faxed through a fax machine 3 times. You couldn't really read it. You didn't know what was on there. Or if it was like a PDF, it was a PDF made off of a photocopy, like off of a Xerox. So you couldn't search terms. You'd have to read through maybe 400 pages of document to find out what you were looking for, try to go through the index, find what you need. But with these municipal codes, this is an example from Wisconsin. This is happening everywhere. This is happening in South Carolina. This is happening in California. Like, this is everywhere. These municipal documents where you can go in, when you type in post-construction or type in inspection program, and you can find everything. All the codes are in there, all the chapters and all the sections. This is a great tool to help property owners to kind of show them this is your obligation. Here's, per this chapter, this section, this is what you need to do once a year, submit an inspection report, etc. But these are a great resource. So depending on if you're a specifying engineer or a municipal engineer, you may view this differently. If you're on the municipal side and you're not doing this, I highly recommend looking into it. It's clearly something that a lot of people are moving towards. If you're a specifying engineer, I would just say, have it bookmarked on your browser, because it is a great resource. And then the other thing that's happening a lot, again, more so within the last 5 years, is sort of GIS mapping, taking advantage of what we already have to show what's there and what's installed and things like that. So, here's some, I'll just go through quickly some examples of, the different plots of properties are outlined, what's there, and you can click on that, you can type in the address, find what you need. These are all examples from all over the country as well. Different properties, then you can sort of identify, is this pond my responsibility, is it not, is it part of that property's responsibility? You can do it at the county level, the state level, the municipal level. Sometimes a lot of the information overlaps, but you can look in more than one place if you can't find what you need, and sort of zoom in and drill through what you're looking for. And this just kind of goes back to what I had mentioned before about the St. Louis BMP toolbox. This is a client we were working with who received an NOV but didn't know for what, because it was just given a BMP name and they didn't know. It's like, well, look, we go on the website and check. It's like, well, you have an impervious paving stones, you have, a swale, a pond, what was the number? You can match it to the number and say, oh, well, what they're concerned about with is your pond. So now you can start, focusing in on what needs to be serviced by tools like this. So these tools are great. If you're not aware of them already, they're there, use them. And if, you're someone who can help implement these in your area, I'd recommend looking into them. And then there's obviously third-party software that can really help maximize the benefits of this, where you can have reports being done off of a smartphone, uploaded automatically, integrated into that GIS system, into those mapping systems. And it's really great, especially I think for municipalities. It's something that's a really great tool. There's a whole slew of these out there. There's been more popping up each year. Again, I think this is the way a lot of things are going to be moving towards in the future. But you don't have to get fancy. I mean, Google Earth is your friend. And I put this here only because I want to show sort of if you use Google Earth, again, not Google Maps, you've got to use Google Earth, but, they have the little, the clock, and you can dial back and you can slide through the historical data and find, was there supposed to be a pond here? We can't tell. It's so overgrown. But, oh, there was a pond here. Look, here was the last time it was maintained. Here's how it looks now. So now we know for sure there's a pond here. And the curious thing about this one is that it's an 18-month interval between, and you can see how much already the pond is overgrown because just no routine maintenance happening to kind of keep that cut back. But you can see when structures are being first built. You can kind of see the life cycle, at least as far back as these things went. They usually go back to about the mid-90s, and you can sort of see how a property progressed and if there was structures there, at least sort of structures on the surface. Hydro International, we've been doing some things. We're certainly not the only ones, but with data logging, water level sensoring, things like that, being able to use that. One of our colleagues here has came up with a system where we could install sort of a stainless sleeve, slide the logger into it. If it needs an antenna, there's one there that's ASTM rated. It can be driven over, and it's flat and it won't get in the way of things. Companies like East Jordan make special manhole covers that fit that in there so it can be flush. If you're worried about snowplows pulling one of those things off, it can be flush with the manhole lid. We're using it for things to see, in places, like Honolulu, where you're trying to say, well, is the tidal influx, affecting things? Is it backwashing into structures? Or in other instances, we're using them to see, how the filters are operating, whether water levels are the filters activating, are things going to bypass, and then crossing that with NOAA data to say, well, there was a huge storm event that was unusual at that period, and we know that. that helps, especially multi-sector general permit holders when reporting to say, look, this was a storm that was, and this is when we sampled, and this is, nothing was designed to handle that. We know that, or we know our media is spent because we can see that the drain down rates are getting slower and slower. So things like this will also be something I expect to see more of in the future. But again, if I can circle back to it, just don't overthink it. You don't have to get too fancy. Here's some examples again. Just Excel sheets that can be downloaded off of local government websites. You can pick what you need for the type of BMP you have, just a sort of simple PDF with sort of a covenant saying, okay, I'm responsible for this and I acknowledge it. You can have it notaried, you can have it not. You can have a maintenance provider in there, you can have it not. But these sorts of things are bare minimums that I think nowadays everyone can kind of do and implement. I do just want to mention there's a downloadable packet on here. There's a few of them, a few handouts. One of them is maintenance myths. I did a previous webinar on that, and I just want to mention it. So if you want to download it, it's really great. Talk about a little bit about oversizing units to extend maintenance. Not necessarily the case. Some systems going years without service. Not necessarily the case. Self-cleaning systems don't need to be maintained. Again, these are myths. So I kind of talk about these a little bit more and explain why, why those conclusions are drawn and if they're valid or not. Or usually they're not flat out lies. They just need a couple more questions asked. But some depths, not needing new media for certain types of filters, low impact development being more cost effective. Yes and no. If you're maintaining this routinely, maybe. If you're not maintaining a pond at all, and then in 3 years you need to bring in excavators, well, it's actually not more cost effective. So again, there's a bit of qualifiers in a lot of these sort of myths, but that's a downloadable packet that I suggest checking out. And if you have follow-up questions, you can contact me after. I'm happy to go over them. There is no magic answer here. The only way to really know, can a system go X amount of time without needing maintenance, or X amount of time with not needing a new filter, or whatever, anyone who tells you, yes, it can go this long without needing new media, it can go this long before needing to be vacuumed. No one knows. Anyone who's telling you that's not telling you the truth. It's just not the case. The only way to know is to inspect. That's it. There's no other way. So routine inspections will tell you how your system is progressing. And then you won't be surprised if something's failed. You can sort of see things on the horizon, and you'll know, and you can sort of intercept and get in front of these things and mitigate large costs moving forward by having routine preventative maintenance, every so often. The example I gave here was actually a local one. One of our units that was installed some 12 years ago, and clearly no one had been inspecting it. And as a result, we could not get the manhole lids off. We tried, using the torch, jackhammer, everything. We eventually had to cut out the frame and put in a new frame and put it back in. The unit itself wasn't damaged. It was full of material, but it wasn't damaged. But if you can't get the manhole lid off, that probably means you're not opening the manhole lid often enough. So I guess, to kind of close, what is it that you can do moving forward? As I just mentioned, there's no reliable indicator other than routine inspections. There's a real difference between operational or preventative maintenance, such as seasonal vegetative mowing for green systems or low impact development. Catch basin cleanings, probably at least once a year. Some areas maybe twice. Depending on the usage, maybe not once a year. Maybe it's 18 months, 24 months. But knowing that it has to happen at a certain period is really key. And that sort of preventative maintenance will save you from corrective maintenance that really costs a lot of money. And again, you see here poor sort of construction, erosion control, sort of catch basins fill the material. And here's a structure that doesn't have a lot of material and wouldn't sort of raise a lot of flags in the sense that there's not a lot of sediment in it, but it has hypodermic needles. And no one's inspecting that, then no one's going to know those are in there. These things are in these systems. And so, it is worth mentioning that non-inspecting, you're not going to know any of that. Again, in closing, I think if you're a municipal engineer or regulator, the plan to start early, kind of getting some sort of plan in place or something in front of owners, a compliance form of some form is the bare minimum. requiring a contract between the owner and yourselves, the local authority, is for the respective BMPs is key. Decide, is this something that needs a third-party inspection program? You don't want to gatekeep out the owners from doing things they can. You want to empower the owners. But I mean, if you have a filtration system, you can't expect an owner to be, going down into the manhole and inspecting, is this filter working? And so when they send in a random photo of the manhole lid or the lid removed and a form saying we did this, you just being aware that, well, no, there's no way you did this yourself, because someone needs to get in there and look at this media, see if this is, this is holding up. So using, so better judgment. Do we want to gatekeep people out of certain things? Rain gardens, maybe an owner can handle. Filters, detention, probably not. But again, I would say the minimums inspection requirements are key. A lot of places do an annual minimum. The problem, though, is that a lot of places don't have the resources. Local authorities or enforcement agencies do not have the resources to follow up on those annually. So they follow up every 2, 3, 5 years, do spot audits around counties or areas. But what are you going to do when someone hasn't done it for 3 or 4 years? Their system may have failed, and now they're looking at a lot of corrective maintenance that need done. Slapping them on the wrist for a fine doesn't necessarily help that at all. The damage is already done, really. So you're really staying on top of that and using some of the technology that's available to keep track of that's really key. Moving things off of physical paper and spreadsheets and onto some of these types of softwares and things that are becoming more easily available and economic is huge. If you're a specifying engineer, be specific, ask questions. The BMPs that I'm looking at, are these approved? If these are approved by WDOE, NJCAT, these types of agencies, you can rest assured that they can be cleaned. They work because they've been approved, in the field, in the lab, etc. These manufacturers have spent a lot of money and time making sure these systems work right. And to that point, ask the manufacturer, ask him for a service estimate. It's not reasonable to get an exact price during the proposal phase for a project, but you should be able to get a ballpark and an idea of what things are going to look like. If the manufacturer doesn't do that themselves, they should have someone easily available right away to give you, no, but you can talk to, someone who I work with who can offer you that or give you a budget for that. And as I mentioned before, just saying, does this work for the, can this be operationally maintained? Are we putting this inside a parking garage and we can't get a truck in there and we can't clean it? Things like that. Yes, it's cheaper to do a low impact development here, but is it really cheaper in the long run? Things like that. And again, who's responsible for this post-construction? Is this a developer who's going to sell the property, so he signs the paperwork for the county, changes hands, people don't know about it? Is it being leased? Then the owner and the tenant argue about it. Trust me, I've seen it. Who's responsible? And really, is there a legitimate inspection and service plan in place? Again, there's a lot of, with the stormwater management plans and the SWIPs, there'll be sort of, charts and tables saying, weekly, quarterly, monthly, yearly, things that need to do. But don't just check the box. Say, look, do you really have a plan in place? It's going to help you. Because once you're done with the job, the last thing you want is the owner coming back later and saying, hey, I have these problems. I don't know what's going on. Your name's on the title block. Can you help me? You want to know that they're up and running on their own. So putting in a little bit of extra effort earlier saves a headache for everyone. And again, if you are an engineering firm and you feel that you can do inspections, especially on sites that you've designed yourself, do that. But then team up with a company that does actual maintenance with trucks and equipment. So then when it needs that, you can team up with them. If you don't want to deviate off of your core competency, you design jobs and you don't want to be out in the field inspecting, then don't. But also go back and find a company who will do that and team up with them so you can know that your owners are taken care of moving forward. So that's pretty much the webinar. Try to leave it a positive note. Some happy duck family here, some clean water. I guess the key really though, educate and empower owners. It's really easy to forget that most people don't really know about a lot of this, and so it's getting better. People know stormwater more now than they did 10 years ago, for sure. But it's still slow going. Just because a lot of businesses have had hard times this last year, we certainly saw it with a lot of people we work with. But it still rained. So these things still need to be cleaned. And if anything, severe weather, like we've seen recently, and we could throw a dart at the map and pick an area that's had it, that just shows how much more we need to be on top of this. So as that becomes in the forefront of people's minds, if we stay on this message of stormwater inspections and maintenance and compliance, that will rise up with that. And I confidently believe within 5 years from now, 2026, we're going to be looking back saying things got even better than it was in 2020, 2021. More people know about it. It's more compliance. Not where it needs to be, but we're on the right track. By all means, please feel free to contact me. There is an interactive version to that Maintenance Myths download that's there. This one sort of, it's with like a flash, and it sort of, has some moving pictures and things, a little bit more polished. And I just want to say thank you all for your time. I'm looking forward to hopefully in the not too distant future doing this again in person, like we normally do, and meeting some of you there to do that, some of these conferences. And I hope you're all staying safe. And then again, thanks for your time.